Thank you.
Plenty of seats up front. We never see you able to put a card up the back.
You're gonna introduce your street pick up? Huh? You want to pick up?
No, you can get started when we can read it, and then I can just do what I need to do.
So, welcome. Maybe you guys should welcome us, right? We're in here.
You gotta speak up though.
Okay, I have to speak up.
Well, no, just speak up to them. Yeah.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay. All right. My name is Carol Morris. I'm going to be doing some facilitation for this meeting. I'm part of the Wright Pierce team. We've been working on with the community to come up with a upgrade concept plan for the pier. We started working on this with the community in early April. Tonight, first let me ask you, how many folks have never been to one of these meetings to talk about the pier in the past few months? So these are people who have not, these are new people, okay? And how many-
Welcome. Yeah, thank you for coming out.
That's great. And how many people have participated in the process to date? All right,
Good mix.
good mix.
We have written comments, though.
Okay.
Those who did not come may well have written comments.
Oh, yes, I'll tell you how many of those we have in a minute. So the goal for this was to work with the community to understand the usage and the needs for the pier and create a new layout that is generally supported by the community. And that generally supported by the community is a key goal here. Tonight, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the process to date for those of you who haven't been part of it, so you know how we got to where we are. I'm going to explain to you what this is a concept level plan. Jason's going to explain to you what that actually means. We're going to talk about funding, how this would get paid for, and how much roughly it might cost, not just to you, but also in the big picture. And finally, we'll go through the concept itself, which, as you know, have been posted on the website. You guys have handouts. Anybody needs it, doesn't need the handout, should raise their hand. Barney has more here. Okay.
Everybody got one of these?
So let me tell you how we got started. The first thing that we did, and I'm sure that even some of you who haven't come to the meeting participated, we did a survey. And the survey was online as well as paper, and it was to get a sense of who used the pier, how often, and most important, what the priorities were for it, because that pier is a hardworking pier and a lot of people use it for a lot of different things. So we got some clear responses on that. We got 227 people who responded, which is pretty good for a community this size. 77 written comments, which was extraordinary. It was about 2/3 year-rounders and 1/3 seasonal. So, you know, a good reflection of the community per se. We then had 4 meetings, 4 face right here in this room, 2 in the beginning of April and 2 in the beginning of May. And what we did was that we broke the different aspects of the pier, the different usages into 4 topics. And we asked folks to come in and comment on those topics in small groups. We broke everybody up into groups of 10 to 12, and we just said to them, what do you think we should do about it? The topics were, first one was safety and accessibility from the land. So we talked about the traffic flow going onto the pier, how it could be improved, what the problems were, etc. Second topic was access from the water. How do boats use it? What are the problems in terms of that? Third was focused on fishing operations, because that's obviously a special thing of its own. And finally, we talked about parking and what could possibly be done about that in relation to the flow of the pier. Here's what we found startling. When we broke everybody up into groups, talked quietly about all those things, wrote everything down, and then the folks in each group came up and gave a presentation, a 3-minute presentation on what their conclusions were. We expected to see things that were all over the map. We didn't. There was an amazing amount of just same consensus on the issues, on the solutions, and so forth. So we then took everything from those 4 meetings, and Jason and Barney went away and came back with a concept plan that you hold in your hands today. So we've done a lot of work on it, and by we, I mean the community, and people who raised their hands second time were here. Many of them came to more than 1 meeting and put a lot of time and thought into it. So we are here tonight to go over that plan, to hear from you folks. Did we get it right? Are there things that still need to be tweaked? And that will happen after we go through some background, discussion of the concept, and then we will break up into small groups again. And the reason for that, just so you know, is that really gives more people a chance to talk. If we have you in 4 groups, 3 or 4 groups around the room, then everybody at the table gets a chance to talk, as opposed to waiting for, 60 people that are here tonight to waiting their turn. So before I turn it over to Jason to talk about what exactly is this concept level plan, what does it include, what it doesn't include, are there any questions on what I just said?
I have a question to the selectmen in terms of the golf club property that was offered to
Yep.
CTC, and I don't see it on here
Yep.
that it has been accepted.
Okay. We will actually address that at the end. That is somewhat separate from what the scope of work is for us. However, we have been working in conjunction with that concept, but you'll get an update on that at the end of the meeting, because obviously that's a key portion of it. Just to be clear, folks, when Jason and Barney are talking, if you have what they call clarifying questions, like you don't understand what they said, or if you use language that maybe you don't like, or it doesn't make sense to you, raise your hand and ask, because we want you to understand. But we would like you to wait until you get into the smaller groups to talk about things you like or don't like, okay? And that way, we'll just keep it more orderly, and we'll be able to get more feedback from all of you, okay? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Blunt.
Thank you, Carol.
Here.
Yeah, good evening again. Jason Gallant with Wright Pierce. Very pleased to be here on behalf of the project, and I'm going to go through what were the concepts that came out of the meetings on the wall, and most of those I think have been posted on the town's website as well, so you can kind of see. We get information from these meetings, and then we develop design criteria that I won't bore you with, but Barney and I distill the information that we received from you folks, and then develop concept plans. So what we're trying to do with the concept plan is get a preliminary plan that focuses on layout of the stone wharf, focuses on the functions, and that we make sure that we heard everything that came out of the discussions with you folks, so that we've incorporated that into the concept plan. One of the things that it's not a construction plan. So we are the first to acknowledge that there are several engineering details that still need to be worked out as we get what the concept is toward construction. But what we do is we want to make sure we get consensus from the community on the concept, rather than develop a concept too far and then get kind of redirected back towards a different concept. So we build on it in a stepwise process using your feedback, design criteria that we develop based on design guidance, and then get to an actual concept layout. So what we do with this is, once we get agreement on a preferred alternative, we'll then move the design to an approximate 30% level. And what that allows us to do, if you remember a couple, I guess it was the last meeting that we had, Colin Green was here from the Army Corps of Engineers, and he spoke to us a little bit about the implications of permitting different concepts. And before that, a small group of us met with both Colin Green and DEP to get feedback from them on some of the ideas that were coming out of the early discussions with folks. So once we get to preferred concept, that allows us to put some detail to it, to go back to the permitting agencies and make sure, we don't think there will be, but make sure there are no fatal flaws. Or if there are changes in the rules that happen from time to time, that we incorporate those. And then the biggest piece that gets us to is it allows us to fine tune the costs and then allows us to position the community for grant funding. And one piece that we just sort of touched on it a little bit with the golf course is that it also, when we develop a concept that we all agree on towards a 30% design, it allows us to understand what impacts might be to abutters and where there need to be temporary or permanent impacts off of town property that need to be negotiated as part of the bigger project. So those are all things that happen that after you get through concept through a 30% design. So it's permitting, it's refining your costs to be able to go for funding, and it's developing and understanding what the overall land impacts are of the project. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that the design can be adapted at any time here. Once we get into preliminary design and toward final design, certainly becomes more of an issue for major adaptations, but we do want to make sure that we're developing the project that the community is most aligned with and that we have general concurrence on. And then another component that we aren't really ready to address, but we've talked about it a little bit, has to do with sea level rise. And certainly as we position for grant funding, the more resilient we make the structure, the more appealing it's going to be for the grants that are available. And we certainly have the opportunity to raise the structure or manage its elevation to whatever sea level rise number is agreed upon by the community. So I just want to make sure that is out there. And with that, there was some grant money, that Shore Harbor grant money that was obtained earlier this spring that you probably heard about. It's nearly $50,000 of grant money that's going to be used later on in the process to be able to look at the FEMA base flood elevation. There's some discrepancy in what's been posted preliminarily and what we think is an appropriate elevation for the stone wharf. So that will be done as part of the development past concept and the preliminary. Some questions might have come up as to why that hasn't been done yet. And the answer is that grant money isn't actually available to the community until August. So we're trying to get through a concept now and then get to that as one of the next steps. So that's a lot of me talking. Any questions on that? So one of the things I mentioned is funding and how much can the community expect to pay, what kind of support can we get for funding. Certainly there are some significant dollars out there now through the bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently passed. So some grants cover 100%, some grants cover 80%, some of the state, some of the, my new best friend over here. Some of the state grants, they're smaller, cover like a 50% level. And they do, like I say, come from a variety of sources, whether they're federal or state grants. So some of the examples are the Division of Marine Resources, got a whole list here. Some congressional discretionary spending, if you've heard of earmarks, those are now back. The town did go after preliminarily some earmark funding and then decided to hold off for the stone wharf. There's US DOT in partnership with Maine DOT grant availability. There's FEMA hazard mitigation grant assistance. There's National Marine Fisheries Service grants, as well as NOAA grants that could be available. We'll work with the selectmen, we'll work with Vika on multiple but coordinated grant asks. Most of these, because at the core, we have a transportation facility. Most of these, the best opportunities are likely to cycle through DOT to federal highway that way, and or DOT to congressional discretionary grants and earmarks. At least that's what we've seen in the first round this year. So those applications are generally due for design work. They're due in July. For construction work, they're due in September, and they'll be on repeating cycles. So our goal would be to get the project toward a permit and then go after those grants so that in the next funding cycle, we know where the community is gonna be. And then the next question is, well, how much are we talking about here? And our preliminary estimates are that we're talking on the order when we show you the concept of $10 to $12 million to be able to modify the stone wharf for the concepts. So what that looks like for the community, most of the grants we're talking about would be 80% level funding by the feds. Your town portion of that is on the $2 to $2.5 million range of that, 10 to 12 million. So just for perspective, that's what we're talking about. We've had several questions along the way about what's this really going to cost, and we put preliminary numbers to it based on what we've seen with construction costs, what we've seen with inflation, and trying to project out to when we think a project like this could reasonably get done, and we put contingency to that too. So it's what we call it is a class 5 estimate, which really means that it's on a 0 to 5% level of design. So we haven't done enough design to really get it toward bid pricing, but we have enough of an idea of the components that will be included that we can assemble an estimate with, at this point, a 30% contingency to get a handle on what it likely is going to cost. So depending upon when this goes forward for grant work, that number could push up. And what we try to do obviously is get the most grant funding that we can for the project to minimize the community's exposure there. So it's a little bit of background as far as what we're looking at for grants. It would be our role, our responsibility to try to push for those grants. Certainly, we would work with the town, work with the select board, work with the town administrator to push those along, but we would be working in lead with the funding agencies on those. We have dedicated folks on staff that are, at this point, with the way money is in weekly meetings on federal grants and what the deadlines are, new programs that are coming out. So in good stead there. And what we found through the initial grants that we applied for or awarded is that your project is highly regarded and that your project has high potential to receive the types of grants on the value that we're talking about. So we're encouraged by that, and things are looking good there.
So the 3 components that they're looking for successful grants?
Yeah, so definitely resiliency, and they're looking for making sure that we're designing for the long haul. So when I say resiliency, I'm talking about sea level rise. And then we're also looking for the biggest piece is community support. If we don't have community support, it's DOT or any agencies is not going to really be willing to go to bat on behalf of the town. So that's why we've really focused the last several months on building community consensus to the extent we can. Because we want to go forward with the project that you all say you want to build. That's how we get this done.
Clarification on process. If we see something that is an existing condition in use today, which is not on the new plan, should we bring that up in the small groups or?
Yes.
Okay.
So with that, yeah, the intent certainly was to incorporate all components that exist into the concepts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Barney to give a 5 to 10 minute discussion on the concept and kind of go around the points of it.
Obviously, you're not going to be able to see from here, but that's why we gave you handout so you can follow along.
This time? Okay. So you all use the pier, and we've had some great stakeholder meetings to learn how you use it. So we think that we've created a plan that both keeps all the existing uses that are on the pier, but makes primarily safety improvements and makes the pier more efficient. So how have we done that? what we've done, and today was a great example. We came in on the 4 o'clock meeting, with, I think, the pizza delivery occurred, and it was organized pandemonium. Congratulations. We counted the number of cars that were on the pier, and I think we came up with 25 to 30 cars. And they were, everybody was going in a different direction. So clearly, what we heard from the meetings was that we needed to create a situation where we had no backing up, if possible. In other words, a rotary movement to bringing people onto the pier. We also noticed, and it was noted in the meetings, that there was a bottleneck that occurs at the end of the finger pier as well. And so the ability to turn vehicles around and getting them to go in the opposite direction and stay out of each other's way is really the kind of the hallmarks of this plan. So the first, someone has already coined it. I overheard them talking about the yellow brick road. But that is the primary route that we want you to take coming into the pier. And so if you were to drive in here, you could drive all the way around and then come back out again, or you could keep circling if you wanted to. But basically, what that does is allows you to come in and move off into a drop-off lane, pickup lane, pick your person up, get your pizza, and then go. The other thing that it allows you to do, if you're a longer wait person or the ferry hasn't come in yet, you could turn inside and go in what's called this stacking lane that's on the interior. And that's really designed for cars that could, come and line up behind each other and just stop. We want to keep the yellow brick road clear to the extent possible for emergency vehicles and for also, not to say that you can't stop and pick people up, but we want to keep that traffic moving. But the reason we chose the outer lane for the primary lane was because, well, it splits the stacking and the drop-off lanes nicely, but also it's the biggest radius. So we have to design for the worst case scenario, which is going to be a fire truck or a panel truck or a school bus. They can't take the tight radiuses that a car can. So a car would be on the inner side, but the emergency vehicles or truck and trailer combinations that are using the barge ramp would go on the outside. So basically, no one would be going against the flow, which was done remarkably today. So what else happens here? So if you turn down onto the finger, the first thing you come across is this blue area here. Well, that is a change in gradient. Where you see blue or violet is a change in gradient. Why is that? We heard very strongly from the fishermen that they do not want to raise the elevation of the pier, or they're willing to raise it, but they want to keep it minimal because their livelihood is in part based on their ability to get their materials onto their fishing boats, and the lower the pier, the easier that is to happen. So in order to create a turnaround, right now it's pretty narrow between the walkway and the pier. So in order to create a turnaround, we actually moved the what I call the basin pier. We moved it back, and this allows us to raise the pier, make this stub pier that feeds the basin, make it higher, so we can deal with sea level rise with this smaller pier. And it also leaves space to turn vehicles around at the bottom. So people coming out to get or drop off or pick up equipment from their skiffs that are kept out here, or the visitors that are coming on here, can go out here and turn around and then come back. So again, we try to be able to give people the ability to turn their vehicles around. And then the ferry location. Right now, the ferry is not moving on our plan. We've left the ferry exactly in the position that it's in. What we have done is we've added an extra float to it. And we put in longer gangways. Actually, you call them ramps. So we put in longer ramps. And why have we put in longer ramps? Well, to deal with the ADA. The American with Disabilities Act, this is going to be considered a new facility. It's going to be required to have, make the ferry accessible. So these longer ramps are incorporated back to another takeoff pier, which we put here. So we're calling this the ferry pier. That would be elevated according to what we come up with for sea level rise. You come off this with your ADA ramps. We add another, this is what you wanted to do. You wanted to add a second ramp to make the flow of people quicker and more efficient. So you have people going down the ramp. You could also have people coming up the ramp. And those ramps are going to be quite heavy. So we're going to put them on another float that we connect to the ferry float. And the other piece is that the ferry is a registered Coast Guard registered vessel. It's going to have ADA requirements that are likely to be even more stringent than what's required with these long ramps. So there's going to have to be potentially some additional ramping on that extra float that we talked about. So we come back to the ferry landing pier, and by putting in these longer ramps, we have displaced two of the floats that you currently rent right now. And so what we've done is we've moved those two floats, these B floats, we've moved them from under the ramp, we've moved them over to here. And we've put a gangway ramp from the pier down to those floats. And so this area here next to the drop off sort of becomes the area where people are dropped off and where pedestrians can mill around. You know, Otto's Pizza could be positioned at the end here for pickup. We have shown a location where a shed might come. And I can say that the shed was might have been the most talked about thing during the stakeholder process. People disagreed or thought it was a great idea. We put a placeholder there for a shed. Then we come into what I'm calling the working waterfront area. Right now, you kind of split that between parking and it's also your southern landing for your fishermen. That's been crowded by bringing these B floats over. And also, this is not going to have the same serviceability as the finger because this area is going to be raised with everything else. It's not, well, depending on what the gradients are, the idea is to raise everything that approaches the ferry pier so that you can, during a flood situation, you can physically get a vehicle around to service the ferry if it's an emergency, or if you need to walk to it or access to it, you won't have to walk through water when you get off the ferry. And I know you all can walk on water. So this is the working pier area. Because it's getting raised up, the barge ramp has to become longer because we're going to a higher place. So what we've done with the barge ramp, since we're going to have to redo it anyway, is we pushed it out to make more space up here for staging of vehicles to go onto the barge ramp or to turn around and vehicles waiting to be barged off the island or equipment coming in. We try to be sensitive to the fact that you need and use this area for multiple uses, but right adjacent to the barge ramp. So if we continue across, we have We've maintained the golf tee. And we've created a separate walkway to the golf tee. So we're trying to get people, pedestrians, the pedestrian areas are green. So pedestrians, you can come down. If you're parking up the road here, you can come down this pedestrian area and walk right around the, what I call the rotary. And you can walk around there and you can walk directly to the ferry pier without crossing any traffic. Or you can cross these two lanes right here and walk down to the golf tee if you're a golfer. Your current pier has 6 spaces that are ADA accessible. And so we've provided 6 spaces here that are ADA. So we've got 2, 2, and 2 in the center. We have another 4 spaces that are available for parking here, parking assignment. We haven't attempted to assign that parking. That would be for the town to do. We've also created parking spaces over here that could be assigned. They're adjacent to the working waterfront. It would make sense to somehow connect those spaces to the working waterfront. So it was mentioned before, we've not done any changes in parking above. That's going to be, additional work that if the selectmen combine the projects that have been done by Stephen Mihar with what we've done. And so the plan is identical there. So just looking at the waterfront, I do show on here, these contours are your dredged contours. I know there's some additional work with the dredging that needs to be done, but these are the depths of water that you have out there now. There was a lot of interest in moving the floats out and putting them in deeper water. We've not done that, but that could be part of the plan. That would be fairly easy to do. But what we've tried to do is look at keep things tucked into the existing pier and also provide a ramp to all the floats. I know there are some ladders, particularly over here. The ladders feed the what I call float J, and what is float J in your ordinance also. That's the annual rental up to 14 feet. For the basin, we've made some improvements by moving the basin takeoff pier back away from the end of the finger. In this location, we've been able to widen the distance between the breakwater and the floats. So it's not quite as congested as it is in here now. And we've also been able to connect and add all these floats together. So this string of floats is now all connected, and we've gained 3 floats. But 2 of those floats are the commercial floats, fuel and repair, that were relocated when we put the basin takeoff pier in. So what does this do for us? We heard a lot of information, a lot of indications that there wasn't enough docking space. So this increases the docking space here. We've provided a ramp to all the floats so that you get safer access to and from the floats. You can still have ladders to directly access the pier. The fact that you've got a ramp to each one is just a sort of safety feature. Let me look at my list real quick here to make sure I hit everything.
Yeah, I think you hit it all.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm gonna, actually, there is one thing, I just wanted to probably talk about the fact that, so here's where we are now in terms of the edge of the pier, and obviously we're making it a bit larger for circulation purposes. And the reason that we're allowed to do that is because the purpose of doing that is safety. And if it's a safety issue and a flow issue, we've been assured that we can get a permit to increase into the code that much. Parking is a no-go in terms of permitting. When Colin Green was here last month, he was very clear about that. So for those of you who are wondering why we're doing that and why wouldn't we do that, that's the reason. This is allowed because it's safety related. This is not. So I'm actually going to open it up to some questions before we go into small group. Before that, I want to give you folks an update on where we are with the parking on the road and the other land up this way.
Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Vika Wood. I'm the town administrator. And so to kind of prevent further questions that are probably going to arise in the smaller discussions, that a lot of people are aware of previous year's negotiations with the golf course about the land that was voted down a couple of years ago. The town is currently in the process of doing some talks with the golf course to see if and how land could be acquired to create some additional parking. In addition to that, this winter, CV and Mahar, a different company, had given us some preliminary designs of how we can widen the stone pier and how we can do either parallel parking or angled parking and have a pedestrian walk on it to further provide safety and efficiency. The selectmen made a decision to hold off on that. The road, the cluster. So what you see on this is the scope of work that this company was designed to do. Nothing past that. CV and Mahar, a different company, was working on the road itself. The selectmen made a decision to put that on hold because we really need to have an understanding of what's going to happen with the stone pier, what's going to happen with the golf course, and then have more of an efficiency in working on all three of those things side by side to make sure that everything is efficient and all the three pieces come together and there aren't any big gaps in the middle. So there's really not a whole lot that could be publicly discussed about the golf course negotiations right now, but from the public standpoint, know that the town is working and hoping that some property acquired could be possible. So then we can take some parking spots and put them in that area.
So it's a work in progress, essentially. And so now I'd like to say, let's open it up to questions about the plan, not comments in terms of you like or you don't like, but do you have any questions about how it works or want to know why we did something that, you know, maybe Barney didn't totally touch on? 1, 2, 3. Sir.
Just curious on the estimated bump out that's going into the code.
In terms of cost,
No, about like what?
Oh,
100 feet,
so yeah,
50
so
feet,
that's like 3,500 square feet, so it's probably, we can put a, I don't know if we can put a width on that already, but so it's a 12-foot lane, so it's probably 45 feet out off of the pier now, and probably 80 feet long. That'll get you about that 3,500 square feet, I think.
120 times 35, yeah, it's maybe a little bit more than 4,000.
So in the yellow brick road area, you know, circular traffic on the back part of the pier, are there curbs for the sidewalks? Are there curbs protecting the parking area, or is that all flat and painted?
So that's a great question. So you're obviously going to have to maintain this in the winter. And we've talked a little bit how we're going to demarcate those areas. So yes, we would like to separate the pedestrians with a curb there. And we'd also have pedestrian railing to prevent people falling off the edge. So these ways here, there's a couple of different ways to do that. We're talking about raising that section of the pier. So whatever the material that ends up being, we can create different patterns in it if it's concrete. Or we can use combination of concrete and asphalt. So the question is, or we could paint sections of it, which is what you do now on your pier. You have pedestrian areas separated with lines. So all of the above, but that's a great question. That's really a final design opportunity.
Yeah, we'll probably go through a couple iterations on that. We want to make sure that we've got it to the point that it's most easily maintained for the town for the long term. So but yeah.
Okay, ma'am in the back, and then you, sir, and then you, sir. Yep.
I'm just curious how high the pier would be raised. And there's a ramp on the right-hand side leading to the golf tee.
Yeah.
So are those two different levels over there?
Yeah, so the thinking here was that if the golf tee floods out occasionally, no one's gonna really suffer too much. Somebody might lose a hole or something, but so to save money, it would be possible to ramp down from up here down to this level.
So that would not be a raised part of the pier.
I mean, it's all to be decided in final design, but that was the thinking.
Yeah, and the concept, yeah, we leave it as its current elevation, put a small retaining wall and then have a ramp there to be able to, so you still get access to it, but yeah, keep that piece down.
And in terms of
And how high?
Yeah, so how high is a question to be determined. So we've looked at it on the order of 3 to 4 feet. We've also looked at provisions for up to 8 feet in some areas. And we, as I mentioned before, we're gonna go through and do a study later on. The issue is that right now, the elevation that FEMA says is your base flood is 9.3, and they're saying it's 20. It needs to be revised to 20. So we think it needs to come back down closer to like 13. So we're in the 3 to 4 foot range, but there may be, depending upon how this gets done and for what ultimate design life we pick as a community to be able to do this, it could be a stepwise process. But what we've been showing to date is on that order of 3 to 4 feet for the elements that get raised.
And I think the important thing to know as well is that this design will work regardless of how high it ends up having to be. And as Jason mentioned, they're gonna start to work on that with FEMA in the fall to give the community an answer on where it would need to be. Okay. All right, now we have you, sir.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. On raising the height, do you have any studies that show what the latest projection of the minimum height that it must go to avoid the flood?
No, that's the work we need to do. Really, we have some, so we can make some approximations, but until we go through and do that study, we might be making approximations based on bad assumptions. So it's in that ballpark, like I was talking about.
The other question is materials. You have a historic granite pier. What are the materials going to be to raise that you use? More granite or concrete?
So what we've conceptualized, yeah, so far what we've conceptualized is raising the perimeter with concrete supported on piles that get drilled down through the existing granite. And then using a gravel or stone infill, an engineered fill that will be stable over time, because water is still going to want to wash through that granite. And we don't want the material to wash out with it. So the most probable cost-effective way to do it would be to a perimeter ring around it, reinforced, so that if later it was decided, we're trying to do what I call an adaptive design, so that if later it's decided that the pier gets raised again, you don't have to do some of those core structural upgrades around the perimeter. And that's some of the work, we did some drilling work last summer and did some analysis associated with that to get sort of an envelope of solutions that could be adaptable over time. A concrete perimeter filled in the interior.
So what you saw at 4 o'clock is not unusual. In fact, I would say at times it gets worse. So with the capacity and the drop-off lane and the stacking lane, is there enough capacity for all those cars? Or are we gonna end up with a yellow brick road being blocked? That people are just gonna stop there and end up with the same traffic flow problems we have now?
Great question. So, for example, the number of spaces you have on the pier right now is 26 plus 6 ADA spaces. That doesn't include, what happens out on the finger. So you've got 32 spaces, 32 car spaces. And then you add to that with when people come in and just randomly park. What we've got with this design is we've got a total of 15 spaces in dedicated parking areas. And then if you add the stacking, that's about another 10 cars. So you've got 25. And then if you add the drop-off zones, you've got about another 8 or so. So 25, 33. In other words, the point is, with the stacking and the drop-off and the dedicated spaces, and I haven't put any cars parking spaces in your working waterfront area, which is what you do now. You've got about the same capacity. And then so your added parking, that added congestion that we saw today, you could conceivably, have in your yellow brick road very temporarily. It's just, you've got to, but obviously this is going to take some learning to use, and it's going to take some, guidance, and it's going to take some cooperation to make it work.
We've tried to make a more circular pattern so that you don't get the gridlock we see now, where you may have 3 cars each facing a different direction and parked at the same time.
What tends to happen when the ferry comes in and people have a lot of freight is they move from the parking places to bring their car or truck around so they can load it.
Yeah.
So you need a fair amount of capacity there for people to be able to do that as well.
Right, you mean in these drop-off pickup lanes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, I mean, you can conceivably use this, what I'm calling the stacking lane, the inside lane for pickup and drop off, and also use this one out here.
The concept that people talked about when this came up in that first meeting was that when you're at the airport and picking people up, there is still a lot of pandemonium at the airport, but there's sort of a flow that people are going in the same direction, and you stop and you move and your people come out and you move on and more people start to move up. So that's kind of what we're trying to replicate here.
We're further trying to alleviate that a little bit so that the takeoff for the ferry is now pushed back towards the top of the pier. So you're back probably 40 or so feet to where the wider part of the pier is. So understanding that most people want to load and unload right at that spot, try to move that back to an area where there is physically more room.
Other questions? Okay, 1, 2, 3. First one.
For those of us in the fans throughout the meetings, I think we were really pleased to have Army Corps show up at one of them. And it was refreshing to hear Colin say that we have a great story to tell, all right? And then from a permitting perspective, he actually went through a lot of the trade-offs, the pluses and minuses associated with filling in the Northeast Code. Our focus throughout the meetings clearly was safety. So I guess I have to say that I'm very disappointed tonight with what you presented to this community. In particular, an elevated pier off the northeast section of the Wharf is what Colin advocated against. The U.S. Army Corps said that an elevated pier in this arrangement, all right, was not advisable, and he would permit a filled-in code before he would ever permit that. I would also offer comment that from a safety perspective, your yellow brick road, your racetrack, whatever it is, designed to very tight turning radiuses, and what I count maybe a 4-car pickup, should be oriented 90 degrees different extended for growth, and the 24 cars that you saw at 4 o'clock today. I'm puzzled by, when we use the airport analogy for drop-off, why you have the moving vehicle lane between 2 stationary lanes. That merely encourages pedestrian traffic through your racetrack on the inside. When I go to the airport, the cars that are parked next to the curb have a driver in them, are attended. The next lane over are people who may be stationary, moving slowly, seeking to get an open space, perhaps loading in that location. And the moving vehicles are all the way to the left. So I think in order to get a smoother flow, greater traffic, we need to flip it 90 degrees, fill in the cove as Army Corps suggested, and then give the community something that stack the cars that we need.
So that is not what I heard from Colin. Do you want to comment on that at all, Jason?
Collins specifically said that an elevated deck pier from a stormwater perspective was not advisable, and that a bulkheaded filled-in pier with proper drainage accommodation was more desirable from a permitting perspective.
Yeah, we can go back. So I guess we should probably revisit that, but I don't think, I'm not saying we disagree. I'm saying I think we're thinking about it in different ways. There are impacts associated with fills, and there are impacts associated with elevated piers. And the way they look at it is a square footage of impact to the tidal resource. So if you have a structure on piles, the area of the pile itself is what the impact is. And he was talking about that as being, from his standpoint, I think more favorable because it's just less impact. That if you have a structure that is completely filled in the resource area, that has a different impact. So there's impacts that, just a sec, please, there are impacts that have to be accommodated for fee, but then he was talking about the reason for the impact. And I believe that if we're focused on safety, if we're focused on flow, if we're focused in safety, meaning both for vehicular traffic and pedestrian traffic, that he said that either of those alternatives are permittable. What I think he did say was that by alternatives, I mean the type of construction. And then what I think what we did get was that parking, to expand into the tidal resource purely for parking would be a very tough sell without a substantial alternatives analysis that proved there are no better ways to solve that problem. So maybe I helped clarify that, maybe not.
We disagree on what we heard.
Okay, well, I mean, that's how,
Because it was all safety focused, it was not about parking, it didn't enter those discussions. It was merely accessing the pickup drop-off spot, right? And when we talked about the elevated pier design, he actually went through the initial construction costs versus life cycle costs of maintenance for an elevated pier structure, okay? And he said, I would favor it, okay? And I think it would be a better approach to have the filled-in solid surface.
Yeah, we talked about that, yeah, together.
So, just real quick, the note saying that elevated pier, I know it was really intended to say this area is elevated from the existing. So how this is constructed is, again, a final design issue. It would, we will have to look at both options because DEP and Army Corps will want us to. But really the note is really talking about elevated piers. So the area of intertidal impact, the 3,500 square feet, is this entire area that's over the existing mudflow.
okay, so and in regards to your first comment, when we get into the small meetings, I would appreciate, can you just draw, we can draw that so we can get that on the record if you would be so kind, okay? Thank you. Yes.
But, just wondering about bicycles. If you're down there now, there are, today was just there are 30 bicycles down there.
Okay.
And is there a provision for all of that parking and bicycles coming down?
That is a great comment.
Okay, and my second thing is, this may not be popular, but, we're really, excuse me, we're really going through all of this because we have so many cars. And has the island ever considered really taking up, limiting or decreasing the number of cars so that there's less people who are traffic?
So there was some discussion of that at the last meeting, which was about parking, following along. There was really no consensus or feeling from what we heard then, was that it was realistic to do so, because it's a big island and people need to get around. However, I mean, that's a community discussion to have that's sort of apart from this concept design, and folks should talk about it. Okay, somebody, one more person in the back, and then I'll move to the front.
So yeah, I just have a couple of questions on the concept plan, like, you showed do a couple things, and it's kind of focused on the map here, left the barge ramp. The floats B1 and B2, as it stands now, there's no water there, at low tide.
Right.
Do you, well, kind of, I guess, two-part question, do you anticipate that part to be dredged out so that those floats would have any use at all tide access? And the 40, where it says 40-foot pier face,
Yeah.
right there is intended to be working waterfront. I think I understood you say that right now is on the whole pier, the least desirable place for a boat to go, because it has the least amount of water there. Rocks have kind of fallen in, and the barge has kind of washed up around there. So to leave that as the only working waterfront on that side, I'm just kind of curious why you decided to do that instead of having it up where B1 and B2 are, because we've lost the spot now where B1 and B2 are. You can't set tracks there anymore in this concept.
So we have got the opportunity to extend that towards B1 and B2. And, you know, we could do that. I thought that was the best place to move those floats. But it may be that we can get those floats closer to the barge ramp, to that area that's not as well used.
Or on the other side of the barge ramp, possibly. So
Possibly
there's been
here.
some discussion about that as well. So, and to the dredge comment, we understand there is some additional dredging work that will be done. We don't know exactly what that looks like right now. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but those floats are not all tide floats now. So they are maybe they're mid-tide floats. So we were trying to replicate the utility of that with the concept, understanding that there needs to be some give and take probably as to where those land in their final position.
Yeah, they're pretty close to all tide. I mean, a real drainer, you have a hard time getting in those.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty close to all tide now, but not where you have them in the concept.
Yeah.
No, we show the contours of the seabed here. We do realize those are not as desirable.
All right,
That's good.
who else?
I'll grant you that at boat time, it looks pretty tragic down there, but we've all been doing it for 91 years, with cars coming and going, and everybody is able to be patient and let the other guy move the way he wants to move and so forth. So my question is it possible to just raise, to get rid of some of the puddles that happen at real high tides, let's say 6-8 inches of the present concept that we have down there now, as opposed to circular patterns and yellow brick roads and so forth, just raise the area that needs to be raised, just a small amount. Granted, we're gonna have to do it again another 20 years, so what? Do it again. As opposed to a 3 foot is what you're saying, roughly, raised now, so what? I mean, why don't we do it in very small increments and
see what happens as a result, as opposed to a mammoth plan. I have to congratulate you guys, being an engineer myself, that you've done a terrific job. But I just say, can we keep it simple and in our island budget as opposed to all kinds of grants coming from somewhere that we're always, all of us are gonna be paying for it, as opposed to it appears free, but it isn't.
I have one question, if I may.
Well, can I answer that one
Yes.
first?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
So, the structural analysis that we did does show that it's stable for its existing condition.
Exactly.
However, when we start to raise it, if you raise it between 1 and 3 feet, the analysis we did shows that much of the same strengthening has to be done. So another way of saying that is that the majority of the cost is in raising it the first foot. So if you've already committed to that cost, the goal or our recommendation, we hope you would accept, would be to then accommodate some additional resiliency where you can to try to get the life cycle cost out of that investment. Because you're talking about an investment that would, if you looked at it on a life cycle basis, it would pay itself off better if you raised it more, because you get more economy out of that initial cost.
I ask one question with respect to that. You're showing pilings and so forth. Did you think about the way they built it already in terms of just adding some more granite?
Yes.
The way they did in the past?
So, yeah, we did, now, do you mean just on top? So, yes, but the reason we did drill into the soil was we figured out the capacity of the underlying soils. That's one of the questions that had never really been answered previously. So the way that these are generally built, and we found this there, is they took the old trees and they laid them down crosswise like corduroy. They let them sink into the mud, and then they stacked the stones, and then they let it sit for a while and stabilize, and then they built it up over time. So they used, the stonemasons back then used rules of thumb that they knew based on how the clays acted in the area. Part of that is on timber crib, part of that is on stone, bedrock, and part of that is on timber piles. So you've got 3 different support systems, and what we determined is we can't just add on top of it because it won't act the same. It won't have the same stability across the length of it. And we do understand that the wider part closer to shore is older and it's not as tall as the finger that goes out. So in order to be as efficient as we think we can be, we've tried to conceptualize a solution with piles around the perimeter, that could be installed quickly, as cost effectively as possible, and then allow for that adaptivity that you're talking about later on, so that if in a 20, 50-year horizon, additional elevation want to be added, they wouldn't have to go back and do more strengthening to the base. That was the thinking there.
Okay, let me just see, any other questions for people who haven't had a question yet? Okay, I'll get to you next. So 1, 2.
Would you kindly walk us through how the emergency vehicle accesses the boat in this new plan?
Sure. So an emergency vehicle is going to come down, essentially follow the yellow route, because their turning radius is they need a larger circle to turn around in. So an emergency vehicle, it might not make it around this corner here.
The inside.
Depending on the wheelbase
Right.
of the truck or the fire truck. So the emergency vehicle is going to come down the yellow route. Gonna have this light on. People are going to get out of its way as it's coming down.
So you'd have priority there, and you effectively use that active loading zone to be able to access. I mean, I guess, are we talking about to get somebody onto the ferry to get them on the mainland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
he
they
would,
have priority access right there to the top of the ramp.
Or they might turn onto the finger and sit right here, but they're gonna have to go to the top of the ramp to get down to the float.
And so because people are heading in that direction, they could actually get off the ramp, get off the edge out of the way, as opposed to now, maybe not so quickly.
Yeah, it would turn onto this space right here, I think, yeah.
This double direction ramp that you're describing, a longer ramp is much wider. Is that correct? So that they will be able to move the gurney.
Yes, good point, yeah, these are ADA accessible ramps, so they have a set, a clear width, which I think is 4 feet. And also, they have surfaces that, you know, will allow you to roll gurney down to the.
Or easier for chair access, yeah, anyone who needs a little support there.
So they're in the.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, all the human element to this. You have these wonderful designs here that we have worked on for 4 years. And my question is, do you think there will be 100% compliance for this? Do you think the honor system will work? Or will human nature take over and somebody drives down and wants to talk with their relative in the other car and they get out? Or somebody crosses from this lane to this lane in front of traffic. In my mind, you're going to have to put enforcement people into this picture. Today down at the stone, or we're just lucky that somebody doesn't get hurt down there. And there's no enforcement of these things. Wonderful design, all set up, but who's going to comply 100% with it? And that's my question. Does it need to be enforced along with this? December and January, fine. The June and the summer months.
Yeah, I think in the last meeting, there was definitely some discussion about enforcement and that might be needed, and also more, to some extent, education, because many people want to do the right thing. And so as long as they know what that is, we would make that clear. There was discussion about potentially having a video made that people could, you know, have on your website and see. And, you know, that is, again, is a community issue. But I guess, obviously, I don't think that anybody's going to stand up here and say that everyone will not cut some corners and cut in front of people and do that. But I think this will make it easier for people to do the right thing. So that may be a little Pollyanna-ish, and if so, I apologize. This gentleman and then you, okay?
There's not been any discussion, and I haven't seen anything written about that this being the scenic historic gateway to Chevy, the most beautiful open place on Chevy. People always put all the photographs, the postcards, you're coming to see the hotel, the golf course. It's like parkland. It's huge as parkland. And I don't see anything here in landscaping or anything. It's a huge monolithic, although necessary, concrete bastion against the ocean. And it's going to be moving high. And on here, what looks like green, that's not green space. That's just walks. I don't see a single tree. I don't see any planting. I don't see any landscaping in conjunction with this proposal.
Well, I will say, in the first meeting, we did have some photographs of a more modern pier with railings and so forth, and it actually was very attractive and looked much more clean and than what you have now, which is worn. Okay. In terms of landscaping, that's probably not part of that. Would be down to the final design. You know,
There's space for it, Alan.
Right, so
Yeah.
part of that is that we want to make sure that we were building, anything we did there, we want it to be resilient. Because if the pier does get washed over, it's a pretty harsh environment. We'd want to probably focus that on the upland areas. We wouldn't want to focus adding landscaping areas within the tidal resource. What DEP or the Corps would say is if you want to improve the tidal resource, and they did say this to us, take the mooring field off the eelgrass. So we're kind of playing with that a little bit as opposed to some amenities, but I agree with you that there is opportunity for enhancements or amenities that, and we could work those in once we understand the core elements that we have consensus on with how it's gonna work for circulation.
And we'll also be doing more to illustrate what the new railings would look like and so forth, so you get a sense of what you would actually get.
Very quick, I think this is an easy question for you. When you drew out your travel lanes, the yellow, travel lane and the stacking lane and the, loading and unloading lane, did you use a standard width of 10 feet for the
And what with the 10 feet?
standard width of 10 feet?
Actually, we used, for the stacking lane, we used 12 feet. For the yellow brick road, we used 14, and then we widened it around the corners. It did get a little scrunched up here, but the intention is to create, as you go around the corner, you know, you have, particularly with an articulated vehicle, it takes a wider track. So we have the ability with the AutoCAD to drive onto the pier and around it with, you know, truck templates, so that we can show, in fact, we can show that on a video. We can show a vehicle coming down and driving around. So you can see how,
So the yellow is 14, the intersection was 12, and I believe the drop off on the bottom is 10.
Okay.
yeah.
One other reason, very quickly for my question is, if we decide to widen the Stone Wharf Road as a community, we're going to be limited by an existing
Yeah.
surveyed setback, and so that may crunch the ability to have all of that width for two vehicles.
To carry it through, you're right, yeah, that's a good point, Mark.
Thank you.
So Mark, up here, if you look at the aerial, we pretty much kept to the width of the existing road.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just shy of 24 feet.
Okay.
And that's okay, because you're really on a straight stretch there. It's when you go around the corners that you really need to allow for additional width.
And are your pedestrian ways 5 feet wide on this?
These are 6 feet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so there are no more questions, then all right, I guess there's at least one more question, sir. 2 more questions.
Much on Audie, can you give us an idea of everything is dependent on raising the structure to accommodate the sea level,
Right.
correct? Without doing it, I mean, we won't be able to do the rest of the details. Could you give us an idea how much that structure will cost in terms of what the total amount would be?
So what we looked at was, so we did what we call a sensitivity analysis. We looked at where it is now in elevation. We looked at raising it 4 feet. We looked at raising it 8 feet to see what different structural modifications would be needed. So what we've done is programmed a cost estimate. When I said $10 to $12 million is based on in the 4-foot range, and there's a 30% contingency on that. So if we raise it up 8, it's not going to be linearly proportional, but it's going to go up that much more, but it will be different. So, but for the purposes of discussion, just to get the ball rolling, we're in that $10 to $12 million range for enhancements as shown with some sea level rise considerations to be finalized.
Yeah.
And I don't see it on this plan, but what is the thinking as far as lighting is concerned? Obviously, there's many more pedestrian walkways.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Is
So
there a restriction as far as light pollution and all of that?
So that would be something you've got a couple lights out there now. We would certainly go through as we do the design, lay out the lighting. There's a couple different ways to accommodate pedestrian level lighting, either in the rail or pedestrian scale lighting. Anything we put out there, again, harsh green environments, gotta be resilient. So it's probably, you know, maybe it's a little more on the utilitarian side than we would see, you know, architectural lighting, but lighting will be as part of the plan as we go forward. We've got an allowance for it sort of as a line item in the estimate.
This is it's a planning board exercise too. We'll want to comply with the town ordinance. I'm not exactly sure what that says.
All right, sir.
How long will this project take? And during the construction of this, what has been considered for accommodating the current CTC and getting on and off?
Yeah, so that's a good point. We actually started talking about that in the pre-meeting today, is that construction timing, it's probably a project that needs to get phased. It probably needs to happen over, we would like it to be done in a single season, but it probably needs to be done in phases over a couple of off seasons. We would work to make sure that you had temporary access or, ability to use the facility while it's in construction. And that's part of what Vika was talking about before with offsite improvements. There probably needs to be some advanced work done or a temporary plan put in place, because you have to afford the contractor the ability to be on that structure that you want to use at the same time they want to use it. So there's off-season construction that happens for the most part, and then there's also phasing of the work, and then there's temporary facilities that we would detail in to be able to get all that done. And it is part of the reason why we're talking about a project north of $10 million, is that we understand you can't just give this to a contractor for a year and nobody else gets to use it.
My sense is the whole meeting is operating out of goodwill to try to find a solution. And I am also trying to do that. We used to have Central Landing, Western Landing, Sunset Landing. I think what we're doing here is trying to resolve all of the issues. We've got school children, we've got ADA people, I'm one. We've got fishermen, we've got other cruising boats. We're trying to put 5 pounds in a 2-pound bag. There's only this one spot on the whole island. Oh, I forgot to mention the golf course. Is there any way on the circumference of this island, by separating maybe just the civilian passengers from fishing and commerce, and leave this one as it is, and then put all of your money into a green field that perhaps has been used in the past? Thank you for hearing.
So
Yeah.
when we came to the project, we got the benefit of some prior studies that were done. And yes, on goodwill, we evaluated through this process all of some competing, some complementary uses of the facility. And it's sort of been our baseline assumption that this is the facility. It's the reason it's been here for 130 something years and been the primary facility. So that the community wants to maintain it for these uses. We went through these 4 meetings. Not one of the primary use groups came up and said, no, you don't have to account for us anymore. So we've worked, or we're going to move down to Chandler's Wharf or somewhere else. So we've worked to accommodate the existing functions in a safer, more resilient way that gives everybody a little more space in a way that's permittable and we hope doesn't break the bank in the long term. So that, I hope that answers your question, but we looked at other sites in the past, and really the focus is how do we make the existing functions that some people say, been dealing with us for a long time, we live with it, but how do we make it safer, better?
Okay, so, oh boy.
Not a question.
Well, my thing is, we would like to get you guys into smaller groups so you can actually say, if you want to change this, wiggle this, move this, and if there's not much of that, then we may be able to move to a final concept. And I'm not really sure if we're there yet, but and in order to get there, we need to hear from you in smaller groups. So could you take your comment to a smaller group and get it recorded there? Could you? Yes.
I'll do what's best for you.
There's one, just quick.
Yeah, it's a clarifying question. This plan actually resembles something I've seen before for Cousins Island. concept plan is very, very similar to the concept plan that we really got behind when the Pleasant Island area was improved. And the concept plan literally was to have a turnaround, to have a walkway. And instead we ended up at the camera that may or may not be more dangerous than what we had before. So how much do you really expect that this is going to be doable realistically?
So that is a really important consideration. We would not want to lead you down a path where we get to a point like either it's land use issues over on the Cousins side or impacts to the marine resources and somebody says, time out, you can't do this. Part of the reason we're here is that we've had there's a steering committee, part of the selectmen, Vika, us as the design team. We met before Colin Green came and met with the group here. We met with DEP and we met with the Army Corps, made a presentation of the different alternatives that we're talking about, showed them bigger picture concepts for expansion into the tidal resource, showed some of the concepts that studies before us had shown, talked about the pros and cons. And I think, if you go back, I can't recall if we were here, but if you go back to Colin's conversation, we feel like we're on firm ground as far as being able to move this concept forward that gets permittable. So that gets back to what I was talking before about funding. It's a permittable concept. It's a concept that the community can stand behind, and it's a resilient concept, meaning that it accommodates for some design life with anticipated sea level rise and accommodations for flooding, so that you get as practical, full use facility that addresses the safety, addresses the flood. So I feel pretty confident based on the outreach we've done so far. We're not all the advice they give us is that until you submit a permit, we can't formally comment, but we were able to have them come out to a meeting here, and we did have a consult. And I think the DEP and the Corps both expressed appreciation for coming to them so early, because it's the worst case is you go so far down and then bring it to them and then say, well, sorry, but you can't do that. That doesn't lead to any success story. So we've tried to engage them early. We feel like we're on good footing there.
All right, I'd like to break folks into smaller groups. I think we can get away with 3 at this point. Some people have had to go. I'm going to count you all off in 3. And this will be table number 1. That will be table number 2, and that will be table number 3. All right, so.
No, at this point, they're here till 9.
I think we're one over here.
Split please. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Right there. Right here. Number 1 looks small. I'm not yelling at Number 1 got big on the side. It's over there.
Right, and also creating this term. Nope, they're not. So I haven't made the pyramid wider. We haven't made the pyramid wider. So we could make so that's actually this movement right here is a turning movement by the truck. It's kind of you come down here, you back to there. You want to come out here. Yeah, but you've got to find a place to go. I'm gonna part of what we looked at. Right, exactly. I'm gonna put bikes and scooters. But I also so I'm suggesting that we may want to put them up with this wider section of the ramp. It's an area that's sloping. It's not going to be, this area is not going to be, because of the shallower water, it's not going to be as efficient. And also the top here is sloping down. So the city front of you can down here, but I mean, you can still use this area, but I'm thinking if you show the parking, show the bikes. So clearly somewhere. So this is we put the parking. We displaced a car park. Man, it's your plan. Oh, actually, on this space. Yeah.
If you're not.
So I know that we were right back here, not very long. Is that it? That's it. Most communities say, well, yeah, I think that's the next one.
How much cars are there?
Yeah, so the sheds was some people thought it was important to put vibration. Very few people, one or two people.
We understand what we want to do.
It's favorite and it's on the mainland. We have their houses, have our cars,
Yeah.
we have our homes. I didn't hear it.
So, Carol, that's a great choice, so this could be. What people think, get rid of the sheds and put the bikes?
It's not.
I'd rather have it over here. 'Cause I think this-
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I don't
Oh, well,
know.
then I guess that would be where it starts. is
Right.
I think you guys should just change it.
This gets
Yes, before we start.
Okay.
This area for.
That should all be.
Flow B1 and B2 is.
Is there more cleaning about it? You know, like a.
I mean, they do it in other places, but it's, I mean, you have to have a crane for every spot, the whole thing's elevated. Different boats are gonna use it differently, you're not. Yeah, I don't know, I think that it's a lot easier to just put the traps on the boat by hand. Deal with it. They just have a crane.
That was discussed, though, whether it's not, it's for more. Yes, allow this whole thing to be. That flow, everything.
Yeah.
That, you know, anything else, you've got to be.
I think they did, but it was said this needs to be raised, so.
So, one of the options, I think that you might have, if you want to keep this area above, there's concept. It's gonna be, the only way you're gonna be able to get vehicle access to it, because if you, this area is low, it's gonna end up like a. You're not gonna be able to drive by over there. This area is gonna be.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you're gonna raise this part, you gotta raise all of it. I'd actually approve golf. But, so you effectively make it a lot harder to do traffic. I'm not saying it would be done with a crane. It's just not as easy. But it doesn't make sense, I don't think. The slope you can need to get down to summits.
Could we keep the going? So we have something to vote on, I guess. And then keep this working on right here. It gives us good.
Yeah, and that might make a lot of crane in there instead of over in the lower spot.
I mean, oftentimes. Right now.
Yeah.
So we got rid of.
Yeah, so we talked about that a couple different days.
That was one of the things that
Yeah, I'm curious why in the Boston commercial fishing meetings I went to, they talked about pumping this out into the deep water and then it's all qualified. Why is that just the cost?
Yeah, I did one side and a few in here. Actually, saw it. So, I guess if we were gonna follow this, repurpose it for the existing parking, just to do separate, we'll figure it out there. Balance out here. So this is come back here. The next part,
and I think leaving that all high, pushing back up further.
So that's why. So there's one discussion.
So then they, you're right,
Technical, some of it is striping.
so you have access to here. So we can keep our bikes, keep our access, keep our green area. So here's like, we don't want to find out it didn't work. And then.
But also, put a new, to then protect more.
So there could be a way to hide it somewhere, just a smaller scale on. Because they know that, see how people. We have to check, I mean, typically. Here's our level. So that you're gonna have that grade change right there. You have to look.
Yeah, I mean, like Carol said, that might be a spot. On this side?
On, no, on, how often you use that excessive on high tide? Isn't this a big place
Well, yeah, I mean, this is good, you know, outside, or whatever, for getting stuff on and off, but at one time, you have to rely on the commercial slopes that we lost their slope.
Yeah, so it's hard to.
Yeah.
I just don't have a commercial flood. Oh, you mean commercial flood down here?
So that's gone in this plan. But if we end up doing no transient boats up here, like we discussed a couple of,
Yeah.
then you kind of have a little room to get in.
So the no transient on these,
Yeah, that, oh, no, the whole base that was talked about.
where they,
15 minutes.
Yeah, it's boring. Whatever. You remember that because I talked about?
So.
I mean,
I don't remember that.
well, whatever, I mean, there has to be some high access for commercial folks and lost it, that's cool. I'm trying to figure out.
So today's commercial code extension of the city in that A1.
right, they're right here.
And so in the two new flows, there were 3 added flows. 40 foot area. Two of those flows.
So we need to exceed the.
Right, so then there's what you do that, think about that, where you're driving prioritization, somehow different.
I mean, we're gonna let everybody on the inside.
No, I'm saying, it's just like today's.
Oh.
I'm saying, floats.
Is there a time of year where?
No, we can do anything on, scary.
So. Work around it.
So somebody would. People want to queue up now.
Yeah.
Now.
Going down. There is a launch that goes out there.
So did you comment on if you were, or if you like, yeah, it is, and then you get all queued up and then the bar is starting. And then the bar is coming and so you go back out.
So one of the nuances to this, that I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess if it was actually marked as commercial, like the first fisherman float now, generally people, transient boats don't tie up. Very rarely somebody will, generally they don't, because it's has the signage and all that. Yeah. But here, there's 15-minute sign, 15-minute tie up, only if people tie up their house. So they don't, really don't leave the sign on these floats. So I think we do lose that ability.
In this area over here, if we did widen this out, with deep water, we'd rather.
So the other thing would be, I guess,
Widen this or turn around, or. I would rather have a discrete here, putting that out. Deep water continues all the way out to about here, that's an awful long way
More of this.
Yeah, so that's really is the question, but what you can see. I'll put the Army Corps limits that they want.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering how that's still working.
I'm gonna write on them, I'm gonna try to.
Right now, they're kind of.
Yeah, I think it would be, I'd like the, keep everything to street. And give everybody their space. And do that like that too.
I think that's kind of what I asked you about the area. Yeah, I've never tried to get in there, so I say it's all kind of, looks like it was a driven, but I've never actually. So some of it actually is all.
Right now, this is a 5 feet right here.
Yeah, more rather than blocking.
Yes.
Kind of curious.
Is that the tendency,
I kind of like the idea of the wall from you because it's like a parking space. You can use both sides.
like walking, parking, there's not a lot
So,
there.
maybe we'll just go through everything across. So, you guys got any more?
Right, so
No, I like a lot of the outside stuff.
All right, how about the, skip the easy things over first. How about the basic, why do the basic like this? The triangle here. Is that pretty good? It's whatever you want to make it, but, that's traditionally what they use. They call it loading and unloading, it's only D, which is only the last.
Yeah,
And the other one is where
something more
H,
substantive than that, like.
G, other ones are going to be and then they want to leave this one free, so this doesn't, it just gets more space. People coming in with donors, use it for overtime. Right, so, I mean, I have some ideas, other facilities, harbor master. And they provide enforcement as well as. You have a harbor master. Oh, no, you
Right. So it's a red on the side.
if you created a source of income for it, so everything's self-serving, so for example, if you were to take it.
Well, the parking attendant, he can mark cars and road for more than 24 hours, but he cannot take them because he's not a sheriff. The sheriff, the contract with the county. But not the fire marshal. We are not a police
You like the way this space is wide, making it more room in here. More room in the basement.
Does the sheriff be able to take it to
Tickets for, so parking tickets for parking limits in our, or tickets.
Oh, you mean like.
I don't agree with this.
Yes. Parking ticket for, yeah, no parking within 24 hours. No parking. They were in two different jobs.
Yeah. Here's my class, take care
Maybe, well. I understand. You're all trying to
So what? Where do you walk down?
The discussion getting out there. It's not a good Yeah.
Everybody else walks down the road, they just walk.
Well, yeah, and, the setting itself, I think our people could put in some sort of voting.
And that's why we made it 6 feet wide, try to make it so 2 feet.
But, that's not really how
wide.
One of the problems. They try to increase the length of town. If there is more.
We had now sustainable operations where,
Right. Yeah, I think there might be, yeah, they call this,
it's not a green area, but
then, so.
Yeah, the intent
Okay, so what else will take now?
Except for the golf. Yeah. Or lead.
and this,
That's kept up high. Yeah.
raised,
Yeah, that's raised to the same high elevation. Yeah.
so, and this concept is great. So, does that sit on the existing width?
Yeah, well, for the purpose.
Well, we really get it.
Yes, for also a little bit, to give more width to the figure, because that's a constrained area. Yeah.
Anything that has to do with
Figured now, for circulation. We can look at that. Your idea is that this way about the
whether
this is
the
the proper line should be.
The idea is that we would have, there's.
Anticipate the airport, you can go both ways.
The fund.
There is, it's what the same amount you have on the pier There's six on it right now.
Yeah, they got a crown, on the side.
There's
Flow off.
Nika told everybody to get out.
I didn't understand what Paul was saying about turning.
I think what you, I don't know exactly what I'm saying, but you have to turn it like that.
Kind of like it in front of the land.
I'll see if I can connect them all.
Well, that's all right. I just don't know if that was wrong. I don't want the advantage of it.
along the access.
They don't really use it.
So that's, I was gonna say, I would say,
And we are-
unique one offense that they use it because it's really little.
You have got the, arguing the line.
They're gone.
So my question is, in terms of like what Mark said here, we don't
The new timber here,
raise the
we spent a
wall
lot of
here.
time
They
proposing this
just
off
want
and,
Centrally
the
walkway.
lower space.
Go down to this here, right? That's elevated height.
Crazy things that they're still able to get the tracks.
Brought back to the structure.
Right, so what we're talking about is high here. So we surround that here. What we're gonna do is still probably the right time for us to do reinforcement. So we have minimum.
It's,
Here.
20 feet by-
Here, probably.
Can I assume also
Right out there. And then you raise this. Slope it down here. Keep the same height.
Actually, 20 by 20.
Have this sort of structure.
It goes out about 20 feet. So each of these ramps are about 6 feet.
Structure. So you've got your existing structure. Oh, there's 6 feet wide. It's sort of
There are 4 clear between the, layout.
Are they separate? They're separate.
Not scale.
That's the figure right now. And so the idea was that, you could remove one, you know, seasons. It'd be a difficult task to do, where would you store it? And there are all types of things.
It's like it's all get down, you got that. Have you had scooters, move it wide, right? That's all right. As much as I love the problem there, having that. I think it's the area. So, more like, take one of the parking out and then.
That's it.
So, anyone that's right away, they run and walk. I mean, you might give a permit for stuff like how it's not right
So, you've got the problem.
Loading area.
13 foot, bigger than 13 foot.
There seems to be bikes that are the same bike.
All right, so, what you do is you come up the ramp and you find a place in this area. This is the best. You're gonna, if you have to stop.
You park your bike, you're not in
And you have to find a space somewhere on here.
So I guess.
Store your bags.
Yeah, they would have lines.
They mow that big.
Please drop your bag.
So you get your bags and then you. So you're pulling all your gear off.
So is this big enough?
So this is only, this is, I think about 8 feet
All I'm
wide.
trying to do is to get.
So, this area here is.
I
I think the line for shooting is. There's, you know what? Got the final lap. How do we do it? Start making equipment work.
We have to think about where those floats go.
When there's no
We're gonna go here, we want to follow this, access this way around, so you go like up to get your car.
So we thought the path was here, could be
Or
further across.
Or somebody's gonna pick up like this, that's totally.
Yes. So different purpose.
I like the concept of the lot.
So we had one particular here.
I don't like it.
One more here. And then these ones are here. This one's out a little bit more. Just have another one here.
All right, I just wanted to.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the-
So. What we want is yeah, so that's what happened there. You're trying to get most or all five.
I know they, what they do.
That's why they close off that area. Yeah.
So people have to walk over that.
This part, you're talking about. Maybe it wasn't clear that there's thought.
And you don't
You're
go
retaining wall here, there's one over here.
So there is.
This section stays down low. The issue is access to it. Now you're doing-
So, is everybody pre-organized?
So.
So we were talking about that green area, space where you put your bags, your car. So it may be smaller than the space we have today. From here, down.
But you want it over here. Maybe we need to make this.
This is the park. Then you can walk over here.
Make this area one side.
Right, then you can. Because then you can line up all your.
You gotta stop and pick it up.
Yeah, but then it needs to be water inside. You run through the circulation.
Right, so you start with this radius right here, so you're adding another lane.
Well, we didn't necessarily have to add another lane. You already got this.
Yeah, but that's, this isn't big enough. So we,
Well, it actually might already.
it's hard to see. Right.
Yeah, it would tie in the same area.
I'm just trying to keep everybody. So the more that we get people to go this way, the more space we have down here.
There won't be any change.
So,
Why is that?
So right now, this is the flooded elevation, the lowest elevation here. This line right here is the the current base flood elevation.
So you're elevated, the boats now, blue, warm, without getting your feet wet.
Yeah, so, I mean, it may be a different degree of elevation, but I assume that this here would be elevated down here. And then this whole walkway would be elevated. And it would be an easy way to make it. And also segregate because that's sort of what, I mean, this is a question of what the area is. In fact, you can see it right here. Or see that one right there.
Yeah, it was a part of the. And that's really-
That's only existing here. So especially about where the ferry is, like this, where
I have another observation. So where you have the island or the apartments right now, it's house limit. If you look at compromise, that's the shared area. So are we gonna be right back in the same parking lot that are not gonna be able to be exposed? Alongside, so I'll tell you, if A1 right now is where the commercial flow is right now, if A1 is this concept, then it's where the
A1 hasn't moved. A1 is where the ferry is now.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Why are the contour lines?
No, that's, I mean, those are the contours that I was doing. So I think what happens is that is, see if I can find the elevation. So minus 12 is right here. So, along the pier face is minus 12, so that's 6 feet of water.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry, I was
So
wondering.
they've got along the boat face is,
Okay. I guess you.
so it's just coming up deeper.
So boats coming in here, as it is now, we can just pull down there.
Yeah, that would be. No, well, again, that's a policy for you guys, but, I assume that you would have, this would be still for the fishermen to use. But that people can still continue to come back in. What we would need to do is put some steps up. Steps up to the elevation. So if you were, had some sort of disability, you'd be able to walk all the way here to get to the model.
Yeah, actually, we talked about that before the meeting too. I want to get what says that, a little bit closer, and then we can, whatever the city, would, we already have this job. And we can put some elevations to it, and show it like 3D rendering on it. Different perspectives, just kind of look at it, it's like, oh, that's how it's actually.
Well, it is actually. And reading.
See you on the tennis court.
I wouldn't.
Oh, we are gonna, if we raise up here. How much?
I think I showed a picture of the, what they did out on Egan, but where they put the targeted collar around the tank of the pier.
those are.
There being legal
Bring
battles,
up the
but.
sizes there, you create all that space. Part of the structure, right now, your granite, you know, it's a good idea. The concrete collar, kind of make a line that sticks up over the face.
Part of that
Gain a little bit.
designated area to there.
It depends on how, what the structural, size of.
I think right now, from the town's perspective, the focus is to all parts, more to acquire the land.
Well,
figure out
so,
what
maybe,
we can, and then when that happens, figure out.
all the way down,
I
so
think
it's-
that's a one-step process.
But if you're able to, I know, side of the tier, if you're able to just. Back over a little bit. You got structural check.
These are things that, I mean, I'm sure the law courts speak for it too. There are discussions that are going to happen, so it's not really a public discussion. Nothing is solid enough where there's really a lot to say about it other than talk and happen. And how or what happens, we don't know that it hasn't. All now.
Yeah, no, right now, I have a question. Yeah. The way to create more dedicated.
The one thing
Space
that
is
keep in mind
to
is
move
if
this
you want to do.
here even further back. So we put, you've got a little bit of space.
There's no tax deduction.
You can see this like this area.
For donating to a nonprofit. So it's, but that's, you know, it's for such creating state awareness discussion that's when you come.
This is the transition, this is the. Slope from 5 feet to. Yeah, so this, the elevation, there likely starts here, changes to here. And then it's all elevated. Yeah. Or whatever it is, yeah, so, I mean, I've seen some people feel this, this thing, putting it down below. So that's how much talking about the bar craft, it's pushed. I did actually consider putting it around here. What happens is you lose all these uses here, plus, I think you want 2 hours. The weight is
There is. I was just picturing it.
If you like the East End.
So a vehicle would explain that. That's why I was wondering.
Maybe this one. So if you had a trailer, you could do here, maybe into come in So you got that big tall.
this one, that says that needs to be simulated.
Once you start putting further, then that's where. Right. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, that's something that came up.
I've heard.
And you made it sort of outside the scope of what we're talking about. In a bigger.
So you come down and you come into this area here.
Early.
But I called out these distances. This is,
Well, today. Maneuvering space to back in, but just want to make sure that the curves were.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, so that's.
I don't think back note of this is gonna be any harder.
I know the
From the handicap zone.
So there's
People going both directions.
So right now, as it stands right now, there's about 21 parking spots on
But you have the additional space in the stacking.
Yeah. So we're already losing whatever. Yeah, park spots. So it's going to be.
That was the idea, but
10 degrees hotter.
This is where we start. Yeah. Okay, let's reconvene, please.
So I've been nominated to go first and kind of represent what our group talked about. So let me see if I can do this here. This is the right spot to be. So,
Yep. Good.
we're good? Okay, I'm not up to mark. All right. So we had some good comments in our group. One of the first comments was a question on why the lane was here, and I think there was a couple in the public, when everyone was together, why is the through lane in the middle? So there was a question, can we push it further to the outside? So we'll take another look at that as an option. The answer was that this was a preferential location to get vehicles and trailers through, while minimizing the amount of push out into the tidal resource. One of the other questions came up was launching a 35 to 40 foot boat on a trailer at this location and how that works. And we'll take another look. We've gone through and looked at backing down here, and I believe we've gone through and looked at backing down this way. But the comment was, if there's parking in the middle, that could foul that trailer access. So normally this activity is done early morning, high tide, not at boat time. But if there's cars that are parked there overnight, they could create a conflict. So we put a little more thought into that. There was that's what that ADA access or ADA parking blocks the non-boat time access of trailers. There was a comment to look at, to maybe resolve that, to look at a counterclockwise shift of this alignment to get things aligned up a little bit differently with the boat ramp. And one of the things that I think we mentioned in the discussion is that we had talked in alternatives analysis of potential realignment of the boat ramp, and we didn't show that here because we thought that generally the boat ramp alignment with Wharf Road was favorable, but we'll look at realigning the road to enhance that. This next thing push all the pedestrians to the south. So the question was, instead of having them loop around this way, would it be more favorable to have pedestrians focus on this side? So we can look at, the way the plan is now, is it really, there's a thought about parking up on the road here and connecting the pedestrians that way and allowing them to come through here so that they could get down either way. So the question is, do we make an active pedestrian corridor through here as well? So we'll take a look at that. Curbing, no curbing. So there was a recommendation to make sure that we try not to have a height separation between the vehicle travel way and the pedestrian way to allow for ease of maintenance. So we'll look at treatments or stanchions or other types of opportunities to delineate those different uses safely while making the area easy to maintain. Last, what's that say there? So this is sort of a really bad sketch, but over here, the question was, can we take that? Because if we're talking about doing perimeter improvements around the finger, can we overhang or cantilever the pedestrian walkway to maximize the width here? And we'll take another look at that. Part of that depends on where these floats are now that serve the barge ramp and not interrupting that too much, but we might have some flexibility there. We'll look at it at different elevations and see how that works. Bike storage at the top. So as you all know, the bikes now get stored down here, but there was discussion if people are on bikes, they're generally not carrying a lot of gear. So maybe there could be bike racks up here. And I think in discussion, my response to that was that once the flow and the general use gets worked out, you can put bike racks in a place that suits you best. But it was thought about from a traffic flow and bikes through traffic. If you could try to minimize that to keep them up here, that might be a good solution. B1, B2 floats. So there was a question about, are these most effective? Should they be looked at over here, or should maybe we take it another takeoff here and then another gangway down? Basically keep those B1, B2 floats close to where they are now, because this area is the June to November fishing area, and by raising it, we're really potentially affecting operations here. So by moving this back over here, maybe thinking about this area a little bit differently, maybe the part of here gets raised, but part of here stays down low, or there's an opportunity for some sort of step down here in this area. It's another opportunity to look at to make sure that, you know, I guess the focus of this and keeping the end low is to really focus fishing operations over here. But if we're still going to have fishing operations over here in the summer, to make sure that we actually give enough space for the functions to occur. So that, I think, gets through the bullets on our group. Anyone from our group that is there anything? Yes, Mark.
The only thing we didn't really talk about much at all was the bar grant, the boat grant / bar grant. And I'm assuming that if the stormwater ever gets picked up, let's say 4 feet, that the bar grant is going to raise the push a little bit to the southwest.
Yeah.
And then become longer, is that correct?
Yeah, so that's basically this area here, where it's part of the bar ramp, would get filled in, and you have a uniform elevation here, and then you start your ramp down, and yes, it would push out further.
My only point to that question is, hopefully, if we do something, can improve this, but first of all, it's longer, maybe we use a little bit longer with the tide.
Right.
And I'm wondering how much room, sometimes they back vehicles off instead of driving them along.
Yeah, no, so, way it's worked out right now, we have 50 feet before you hit any, travel way. The end of the ramp is in deeper water. The other end is taller, so we do have to, you know, finesse the length of it. It's gonna be quite a bit longer, but it's gonna be an all-tide ramp.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, thanks, that was our summary.
So how much time have I got? So, basically, our group concentrated on how, if you have a lot of groceries, how you're gonna get them into the vehicle. So, because it was like, and this poor woman had like 13 bags or something. Okay. So it was an exercise in how many trips we come up here. But the point was, is that right now the practice was they used an area of sidewalk to actually stack their piles of groceries that they're bringing. So depending on how many people are on the ferry, it was felt that I hadn't left, or we hadn't left enough space here for pedestrians and, you know, stacking bags. So we've got to look at that again. I like Jason's idea of shifting this out a little bit, or moving this further that way to create more space there. So that was one thing. We also had some fishermen in my group that did not like where B1 and B2 was, and wanted me to relocate those. And also, what they really wanted to do was to push the pier out here so that they could access the deep water over here. And so I think I persuaded them, but what we're going to look at is possibly putting a pier out here to access the deep water that's just been dredged. There is a problem with, we want to maintain this area for drop off because it's near the pedestrian, near the ferry ramp. So this is going to have to be kind of shoehorned between the deep water, the pedestrian access, and the barge ramp. But one thought that came up is if that pier went in, it could service the fishermen, and it also might be a phased landing for the ferry while the other construction is taking place. There was that. We also looked at bikes and scooters. Where are those going to go? One idea was to put them out here because that's kind of a space that's not used very much. Clearly, there was a lot of effort in our group on, you know, keeping this space for the fishermen, but allowing people access to this pier head here to get to the float system. So it's understood. The fishermen at my table were quite happy for people to continue the practice that they're doing now, that you know, drive out here to get closer to that access point. Generally, widen the pier and the floats. That's this area. Move runway out. So move this area out here to create more space. Generally felt that this is very cramped in this area here next to the barge ramp, and also going around the corner there. So who was in my group? Did I miss anything?
I think we had a little bit more discussion too on the fact that coming to get those groceries of the woman that had 13 bags. which
Right.
was not me. Fact that if they drive in, you've got the yellow brick road, so now you've got to get your groceries from the yellow brick over the road that people are now using
Right.
and going into, what did we call that? The
Stacking.
Stack up. So, there is some concern about how this is set up.
Okay.
Yeah, so that speaks to what we talked about maybe switching those and, you know, a bigger expansion, but switching those lanes. So, yep. But that was consistent in both of our groups.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
I offer a hand.
Okay. So, I just want to say, it's pretty clear who's not the engineer. of this group.
That's why we love
Yeah. So there were some definite similarities here. Questions and concerns about redesigning B1 and B2 as has been discussed. There was some consensus and concern that this is a gateway and the concern that it's going to look big and monolithic and it needs to be considered in terms of what the view shed looks like. And there was agreement that this is something that will be looked at as we move along. But it's definitely a concern of our group. It didn't get mentioned. There was also discussion in our group about, which has surfaced in earlier meetings in terms of minimizing vehicles. You know, that is there a way to minimize the number of vehicles and using vehicles on the island? Not really within the purview of what we're doing, but certainly something that is of interest to people. And there was interested in our meetings too, but nobody wanted to be punitive. You know, that's a big step to take, but certainly a direction that many people are interested in talking about. We wanted to, more bike storage is definitely a thing again. Desire again as part of the gateway to have any place at some point where it could be some picnic tables or something that would be a place where people could sit and enjoy the view. A lot of discussion in our group about how the park, this should be the same package with parking, that it shouldn't be looked at separately, and there was a lot of discussion about how that will start to happen moving forward. The same question in terms of this part looking too narrow for storage. There's not enough room for all the stuff that comes up the boat. So that was a three-way concern for everybody. And what else? I think that is, suggestion to put a handicap lane in here, the ADA parking is here, how are we supposed to get over to the ferry? So adding some kind of a cross piece there, cross space. And that's really, did I miss anything?
No, we had a little discussion about how it could be and
That's right, that's here. There was a question, if instead of it being an oblong this way, if it was an oblong this way, would that potentially be better in terms of the environmental costs? So and that was something that was questioned whether or not we should look at. That's good. Right, so next step is that we will go back and not like run, but we'll go back and adapt make some adaptations. And I think that we've been working with a committee that includes Vika and a couple of members of the select board. We will then talk to them about how we bring this back to you folks. Okay. Thank you for your stamina. Look at you guys. Last one's left standing. I love it.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of the night. Happy 4th of July.
How you doing? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's the- Are you gonna what?
Can you say like a?
Yeah.
You know what? If you could do that, and I'll have a recording. Yeah.
We're recording something. Oh, right, okay, yeah. So that'd be good. I mean, yeah, I could have done a better job if I had done. It's, it was, it had to be there. I got the fisherman at market. No, it was, I did.
Thank you.
Right, I probably-
Thank you.
Thank you so much.